I just really want to talk for a few minutes about the contextual challenge of setting up a project such as SOS and what that really means and why it was needed. So the emergence of SOS, all those years ago now, really was the right thing at the right time, and it was extremely pertinent that it arrived on as a practitioner delivery project at the time, because at the turn of the century we were starting to identify that what we now call the gang agenda, or street gangs as they present, was really changing. And of course, we can say that gangs have been with us for 200 or 300 years in various forms. And some of us might think of press gangs, we might think of the Peaky Blinders in Birmingham, we may think of the razor gangs in the goalposts of Glasgow. We may even think of a violent organized crime. But what we've seen over the past 20 years is really an evolution of this, a reforming and a reframing of this. And essentially the issues around youth violence have widened out, and they have evolved in a way that they're much more violent now than they ever really were before. And there's also greater access to a range of weapons, and guns in particular, but knives more generally. And of course, more and more young people are being pulled into this domain. And what people at St. Giles will tell you is that the people who are being pulled in are younger at one end, but also at the older end, they're not maturing out. We always used to say in academia that crime and youth crime was a young man's game. But now we find, come the ages of 24, 25, they're not maturing out as they once did. They're getting stuck. They're getting stuck in the gang. And the gang therefore becomes something that is much more adhesive, and something where people no longer pass through as a rite of passage, but they enter and then they get stuck there. And of course, what that means, if you're younger at one end and older at the other end, it just means simply more people involved in the gang. And if there's more people, then it means there's greater competition. And that really means that it's more difficult to be identified or spotted as somebody who could lead the gang, or perhaps be what's called top boy. And what that really means is that there's a huge internal rivalry and competition taking place within the gang, let alone against rival gangs. So it means that your exposure to violence is heightened. It means that people are jostling for position. They're all trying to build respect. They are trying to build their position in the hierarchy. And in order to do that, they have to trample on other people. So they have to do some activity, usually a criminal activity, which brings them to notice. It garners them respect. And of course, what we've seen over recent years is that those kind of criminal activities, or strategies, if you want to call them that, have become more violent, they've become more public, and they've become more vicious. And then added into that, of course, is social media. So we now have a whole new landscape where all of these activities are taking place. It used to be, if you wanted to join the gang, you had to be on the estate, come from the estate, or have a historical connection to an estate. And what we find now is that those days are also changing. So as well as the actual physical landscape of a social housing estate, you now have the online landscape where people can promote their videos, their music, their gang. They can build their own brand for the gang, or build a personal brand. And they can try and build respect and gain status in that way. So the whole landscape has really evolved and developed, it's grown, and it's deepened over time. And I'm hugely relieved to think we've got people like Junior, the SOS Project, and St. Giles involved now as practitioners in this particular landscape, because they understand it and we need their knowledge and we need their experience in this landscape. What I find when I speak to young people is that they often feel adults don't understand that world at all. And in the online space, they feel as if adults aren't even present. And young people, particularly from communities of color, the Black community, for example, often feel that they don't get the policing that they deserve or should have, and that they are policed in a particular way. So turning to the police for advice, help, assistance, and support, or even to report crime, is not necessarily something that happens naturally to certain communities. So again, you need the practitioner community, the voluntary sector, the third sector to step in and act as that kind of go-between. But of course, in order to do that, you have to have knowledge, you have to have understanding, and you have to have the practitioner ability to do that. And then to have that, you have to have, I would suggest, a real empathy and almost a lived experience to do that. And that again is something that Junior brings, that the SOS Project brings, and St. Giles brings, because that is an enormous gap between ordinary communities and the government at the top level. So there's enormous value about practitioners bridging that gap. And this is where the Junior and the SOS Project really kind of step into the void, because they have that lived experience and they can empathize with young people about the conditions they face, whether they're having £20 cut from their universal credit or whether they're growing up in what might have been termed a dysfunctional family, where I might call it a family that's parenting under pressure. So the ability to understand those issues, to recognize those pressures, is absolutely critical. And Junior has got that ability. And I'm delighted to say that Junior has, of later years, become my doctoral student, and I'm guiding him in his own personal journey to become Dr. Smart, and I'm very much looking forward to the day when that comes. So Junior brings all of that knowledge, he brings that understanding and that empathy, and he can reach people in ways that other people can't. He can establish those relationships, and he can build upon those relationships, and he can use his own lived experience as the key to the door, as the point of entry into those discussions. And that's not an easy thing to do, trust me. As a white, middle-aged, middle-class man, there are many times I don't get that key to the door, and I have to go to people like Junior for assistance and help to help get me through the door. And of course, increasingly I get there and I find Junior's already through the door, which is fantastic. So I'm frequently looking now to him for assistance to help me with my work and my research. And I couldn't be more pleased that it's Junior that I'm approaching, because he understands these issues and he gets them probably better than anyone I know or anyone that I work with. And it's an enormous relief for me as an academic to be able to work with somebody like Junior and the SOS Project in terms of helping me to get that access. And let's not forget, of course, that Junior has been on an enormous personal journey himself. And that can change people. But what I've found with Junior is somebody who's enormously humble about that particular experience and that own personal life journey. And he's not shy to dip into that. Occasionally it may be a painful experience, but to dip into that and use that and bring that lived experience to the fore to say, I've been through this. This isn't new to me. I've had that experience too. And that is a really an enormously valuable aspect to what Junior and the SOS Project bring to these relationships that they're trying to build. And they've been hugely successful crafting new ways of working, new forms of engagement with young people, an emphasis on building relationships and peer support. And that's much valued and perhaps underestimated, because it's helped to change the landscape around a lot of this. And you may not be aware, but it's something I know, is that other agencies, frontline charities, places that are engaging young people in this type of work, they look to St. Giles and they look to the SOS Project and they look to Junior for forms of best practice. And that's a really great position to be in. And it's down to having the right people in the right place at the right time. And I would probably just finish with this by saying, the academics sometimes think they know everything. And I can tell you, they absolutely do not. And the role of a stakeholder or practitioner, such as Junior, such as Evan Jones, St. Giles, the SOS Project, the value that they bring cannot be underestimated. It is an enormous insight into the worlds in which we work and the landscapes in which we work. And without them, we would all be poorer and the situation would be much grimmer than it is. So my hat's off to you, Junior, and to the SOS Project. Congratulations. I'm delighted in the fact it's there and delighted into the position to where you've brought it. I mean, I think it's an enormous achievement, and congratulations to you.